because I'm hearing rumors that there's going to be neighborhood classrooms set up, but the students are set and the teacher is teaching like they normally would Monday through Friday.
Okay.
And just an additional thing, I mean, from a professional development and observation standpoint, if we set an expectation that, you know, every period starts with the teacher welcoming the students briefly, if it's not going to be a completely synchronous lesson, you know, this can provide, I would think, some element during this virtual time that we can still have teacher observations on some level. It's a completely different ball of wax, I know, but to set that expectation that period 3 starts at whatever time and everybody's supposed to be on Zoom, it follows a, you know, I like the regular bell schedule. That's going to be my new license plate. I think I'll figure out how to get that put on there. But I think that's what we're all saying, with professional respect, to be able to manage that. And yeah, I would be fine if it's just sort of the you know, if the younger kids, if that's not what you think is even possible. So thanks.
Thank you.
So I just want to introduce, I know he thought it was going to be Dave. I want to introduce Dr. Purcell Whitaker. He is our 4th grade through 6th grade special ed supervisor. I didn't realize he was here tonight. And then Mrs. Katie Davis, I did say she was here, but she's 7th grade through 9th grade. And then tuning in virtually is Mrs. Amy Hiller, who's K through 3. Back to Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Rizzo. We appreciate the opportunity to provide an update in regards to special education programming for the Springford School District. Before I get started with the PowerPoint, ahead of time, I want to thank Mr. Cooper, who's going to help me navigate through the PowerPoint here. So I appreciate that, Mr. Cooper. So with that being said, Mr. Cooper, can you please go to the next slide, please? So we thought it was important to identify somewhat of a mission in regards to the type of remote instruction that we're going to be providing for our students with IEPs. So the district will continue to provide special education services for all students, regardless of the mode of instruction. Special education services will be provided as outlined in students' IEPs. In addition to instruction, related services will be provided. Next slide, please, Mr. Cooper. Thank you. This is a little bit of a table of contents of the presentation for this evening. As you can see, we're going to discuss special education programming, what parents can expect from their general education teacher expectations, from their case managers or special education teachers, what parents can expect from our instructional assistants, our related service personnel, and then we're going to talk a little bit about our community-based instruction and our work programs. We're also going to discuss how we're going to handle IEP, GIEP, and 504 meetings. And then we're going to discuss evaluations and reevaluations. And then our last slide will talk about our next steps. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our first slide we really want to talk about is the direction that we're moving in for in-person programming and instruction for special education students. So as you can see, as a starting point, and I really want to stress this fact that this is where we'd like to start. We'd like to start considering our low incidence classrooms as being considered for in-person instruction. And these programs would include full-time learning support, life skills, K-12, full-time autistic support, K-12, full-time emotional support, K-12, and full-time multiple disability support, K-12. Before I talk a little about our next steps, I just want to give you some numbers of the amount of staff and students that we've identified that would fit in our low incidence programs. So we've identified roughly about 170 students, K-12, that would fit in one of these programs. We have also identified over 150 staff members that this potentially would affect. And in regards to staff members, this does include special education teachers, instructional assistants, occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech and language therapists, nurses that will be required to be in the buildings if we're in the buildings. So I say over 150 because we're still waiting for some complete staff list from some of our independent contractors that provide services for our special education students. I think it's also important to mention that some or many of our students in our low incidence classrooms do participate in general education classrooms. So not only would they be receiving live instruction from our special education teachers, but they would also be participating in the general education classwork that is being provided online through Canvas. Next steps, we feel like it's important at this time to survey our parents of special education students. And you hear me talk a little bit about this in our next slide. We would like to survey all special education students, families, not only the students that are in our low incidence classrooms. We feel like this would be important to get a gauge on what families would want in-person services and what families prefer the remote instruction services. Staffing needs. I want to talk a little bit about staffing needs because we've already heard from some of our families that if we do consider bringing some students in, that they are not going to send their students into school. So their preference would be to continue with the virtual learning through Canvas. So if we do bring in some of our low incidence classrooms, we will have to work with our case managers of those students and their teachers, because part of the expectation would be not only to provide the instruction for the students that are attending school, but we're also going to have to provide some instruction for the students that are on Canvas. So that's a piece that the supervisors and principals have been given some strong consideration to, because as I mentioned earlier, the students in our low incidence classrooms, they are moving throughout the course of the day in some situations. So they are going to gen ed classrooms and then they're coming back to the special ed classroom. So that's a piece that we really have to continue to talk about, how to best support our teachers to be able to not only provide in person, but also provide to those families that choose on their caseload not to come in for in person. We know that already, that from some of our families' feedback, that is going to be the case. And then the next bullet is in regards to transportation needs. That'll be something that will be on our survey. And we will also address whether our students would need breakfast or lunch. And we've been in contact with Mr. Fink that if we are in the buildings in some capacity, that some of our students will need breakfast and lunch, or maybe just breakfast, or maybe just lunch. Next slide, please, Mr. Cooper. Thank you. And again, I want to really point out at the top of our first line there, to start, all other special education students will. So to start, there's been a conversation not only with supervisors, with building principals, to really consider our low incidence classrooms to start the school year. And then if you want to call it a phase-in approach, to then look at our next group of students that we potentially could bring into the building. I don't want to sit up here and give you a hard timeline, but I think some of the discussions that already happened tonight are variables in our decisions moving forward in regards to bringing in additional special education students. So all other students would receive virtual instruction through the Canvas platform. They'll also be provided scheduled live sessions using Zoom or Microsoft Teams to support students. The students that have instructional assistants identified within their IEPs, our instructional assistants would support our students virtually. And then they would receive related services live through Zooms or Microsoft Teams. On the bottom of the slide, we will continue to assess the feasibility of additional in-person programming. That's something that we've had plenty of conversations throughout the summer, and it's something that we want to continue to assess, as we move forward. Next slide, please, Mr. Cooper. So our next slide deals with what parents can expect virtually from our general education teacher expectations. Read and review all GIEPs and 504 plans and contact the appropriate staff members, related services, and support personnel. Provide special designed instruction, including accommodations and modifications to students with IEPs and 504 plan accommodations. Provide enrichment and acceleration for students with GIEPs. Consult and collaborate with case managers, school counselors, regarding questions or for guidance with how to meet student strengths and needs. Add instructional assistants to Canvas so they have knowledge of content activities and assignments and communicate as to how they can support students. If additional support is needed, office hours and scheduled live sessions will be available, via Zoom or Teams. Next slide, please. Our special education and gifted teacher expectations. Follow the plan given to all teachers from the curriculum department regarding utilization of Canvas and provide appropriate accommodations and or modifications. So as Mrs. Murray just explained some of the curriculum expectations, our special education teachers would follow the same expectations. Read and review all IEPs and GIEPs. Provide specially designed instruction, including accommodations and modifications to students with IEPs. Communicate with general education teachers regarding student needs. If additional support is needed, office hours and scheduled live sessions will be available via Zoom or Teams. Communicate directly with parents and guardians and students regarding student performance. This is an area in the spring that we really asked our case managers to stay in constant communication, not only with our families, but with our students. And they just did a wonderful job in the spring monitoring their students' progress. And lastly, facilitate IEP meetings through Zoom or phone conferences. Next slide, please. So not only were our special education teachers and our related service personnel extremely integral in the spring in providing services to our students with disabilities, our instructional assistants were an integral and essential part of programming in the spring. And they work directly with students and teachers in order to support student needs. And we feel moving forward, our instructional assistants, again, are going to play an integral part in not only providing services, but also be able to provide support for our students. Instructional assistant support, according to IEPs, may include virtual support for reinforcement, participation in live instruction through teacher-created classrooms in order to provide support for students participating in those classes. So the students that they are providing support for in the general education classrooms, our instructional assistants would also be expected to participate in those live sessions so they can support those students from an academic standpoint in regards to test preparation, study skills, or any type of additional support that they would need. Communication regularly with IEP case managers and teachers regarding student progress and needs. And I mentioned a little bit of this previously, but assistance with study skills, writing assignments, group work, etc., as well as review newly learned material and facilitate assessment accommodations. Next slide, please. Our related services will be provided in live sessions and or virtually in accordance with the student's IEPs. And you can see we listed our related services in regards to our counseling, hearing support, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech, and vision support. Next slide, please. So we thought it was important to give an update on community-based instruction and work-based programs. As you know, all of our low incidence classrooms, I'd say most have some community-based instruction built into their programs, where about twice a month they do go out in the community for community-based instruction. At the high school level, we have a very comprehensive work-based program. Our program's called STEP, as many you know, and we also utilize the Montgomery County intermediate programs. Sitting here tonight, I can't tell you a decision on whether community-based instruction or work-based programs will happen, but we thought it was important to address it and give an update on where we currently are. And the 3 bullet items are items that we'll follow closely over the next few weeks as we get closer to the start of school. Live community-based instruction will be guided by the health and safety guidelines from the Department of Health and the CDC. The health and safety guidelines from our community partners will determine the feasibility of student participation in the community. That's going to be very imperative that we have cooperation with our community partners, but that we also feel that if we do go in the community for community-based instruction or a work-based program, that we can keep our students safe because that is our priority. And our last bullet on this slide is, if unable to participate in the community work-based programs, job skills, pre-vocational skills will be developed and implemented within the Springford area school district buildings or virtually. I have personally been meeting with our STEP coordinator weekly over the past month. Those plans are being developed. They will continue to be developed over the next month in regards to our students that participate in our work-based program in regards to job skills and pre-vocational skills. Next slide, please. IEP and GIP meetings. All meetings will be held virtually through Zoom or by phone conference. Regardless where we are as a district, as far as what students are in the building, how many, we would envision that we would be holding virtual IEP meetings and GIP meetings through Zoom or phone conference, excuse me, for the foreseeable future. Once we're back in the buildings, to limit the amount of people that are coming in and out of our buildings, we would foresee that we would be holding Zoom or phone conference meetings for the foreseeable future. Annual IEP, GIP meetings will be held in accordance with the annual IEP, GIP date. Case managers will send invitations electronically. Final drafts of IEPs, GIPs, NORAPs, NORAs will be sent to parents electronically and are available in Skyward. After our teachers finalize the documents, they will send them electronically. If a hard copy is needed, we ask that parents please contact your child's IEP or GIP case manager, and we will provide a hard copy through the mail. During the school year, parents may request an IEP, GIP meeting at any time by reaching out to your child's IEP and GIP case manager. That is no different than in any other year. At any time, a parent or anyone on the IEP team or GIP team can request a meeting. Next slide, please. 504 meetings. Again, all meetings will be held virtually through Zoom or by phone conference. Annual 504 meetings will be held in accordance with the annual 504 date. School counselors who manage 504s will send invitations electronically. Final drafts of 504 plans will be sent to parents electronically and are also available in Skyward. And if a parent would need a hard copy, they would just need to request that through their school counselor. And again, just like IEPs and GIPs, during the school year, parents may request a 504 meeting at any time by reaching out to their child's school counselor. Next slide, please, Mr. Cooper. Our next slide deals with how we're going to proceed with evaluations and reevaluations. And before I read some of the bullet items, since March 12th, all open evaluations that required some type of assessment to be in front of our psychologists have been paused. So we do have, if you want to use the term, a backlog of evaluations that do need to be completed. And that is something that we plan on starting very shortly. The parts of the evaluations or reevaluations that were able to be completed virtually without face-to-face with students, our school psychologists, our IEP case managers for reevaluations have been completing those sections that they can. So we are going to start to continue very shortly with evaluations and reevaluations, as you can see in the first bulleted item. For the health and safety of our students and staff, protocols for testing sessions have been developed. These protocols will be shared with parents of students that this pertains to and will include: parents will check their child for possible COVID-19 symptoms prior to leaving home. Examinee and examiner will wear a mask and or face shield and maintain social distance. A protected device will be utilized. Example, a plexiglass face shields. If you've been in the school and the house offices, they have the plexiglass that's up now for the secretarial staff. Each one of our school psychologists will also receive that type of plexiglass. If the student appears ill or coughing, school psychologists will discontinue the testing and inform the parent. Examinee and examiner will wash hands before and after testing. All surfaces and materials will be wiped down before and after each child. And hand sanitizer will be provided for the psychologist and student. And as I mentioned earlier, we plan on beginning to start these evaluations and reevaluations shortly, and our school psychologists will contact families to arrange testing sessions. Next slide, thank you. Our next steps. Tomorrow we want to move forward to be able to send our survey out, and then we can start to review our parent survey information, provide ongoing communication with parents, continue to assess and evaluate programming, and make changes as necessary. We feel like a lot of our conversations that have been happening, and I think someone made a comment earlier that things seem to be changing on a daily basis. We definitely do feel that. We feel like when we have one scenario problem solved, and then the next day we're back at the table trying to problem solve the same scenario. So we are definitely faced with some challenges as we continue to plan and program. We're going to meet those challenges to the best of our ability, and we'll continue to problem solve the items that we need to problem solve. And then, I know I mentioned this earlier, but continue to explore the feasibility of bringing students with IEPs into school buildings following health and safety guidelines. Before I turn it over for any questions, I do also want to mention that since March, as supervisors, we have been, don't quote me on an exact time frame, but roughly from March to the May time frame, we've been participating in weekly meetings with the Montgomery County IU, with all the special education administrators throughout the county. At some point in May or June, the decision was made to meet every other week. So we do continue to do that. We do continue to collaborate with our colleagues to hear what they're doing. We also provide some information in regards to what we're doing or what we're planning to do. So we would expect those meetings to continue. Those meetings have been extremely helpful to us. Not only help us guide us through our planning, but also to hear how some of our colleagues in other districts are handling some of the challenges that we're faced with as well. We as supervisors also meet on a weekly basis. So not only with the MCIU meeting, we do have a scheduled meeting that we meet every week to discuss and plan. And that's something that will continue, that'll be ongoing. I'll just use the term under normal circumstances, I guess, typical circumstances. We typically always do meet on a weekly basis. And for the past 4 or 5 weeks, we've been meeting twice a week, scheduled meetings just with supervisors to plan and address things that need to be addressed. So with that being said, we're here to address any questions that you may have.
Thank you for the very detailed presentation. So I'm assuming based on the conversations we just recently had with Dr. Murray, a lot of your plans are going to adapt in a similar way where it makes sense. I think that's what you're kind of alluding to.
Yeah, there are still some variables, and the conversation with Dr. Murray, and that was just being had, those variables do play an effect into some of our planning.
I know it was brought up when, it was mentioned a couple times where the term soft opening was used by the district or by the public in some instances. And I believe this is within our soft opening. This is where we're talking about there are students that we need to bring into school at this point in time for several, doesn't make any sense, for many reasons that are related to from special needs or IEPs or whatever. That's kind of the first step as we're navigating this. But I think that I kind of hear that's what you're saying. I mean, as far as bringing in students when necessary, that's a correct statement?
So what we're discussing is starting to bring in and consider our low incidence classrooms. Use the terminology soft opening. We discussed trying to bring in special education students maybe in phases. So if you want to consider our first phase would be to look at our low incidence classrooms. They are our neediest students in the district. And we feel that would be a good starting point. And that's why in the PowerPoint, I wanted to make sure I stressed our starting point. And like you said, there are still answers that we need to get. And some of those variables that I mentioned have already been discussed tonight and are going to be discussed later in the meeting with some other agenda items.
Has anyone looked into which buildings that would be? Would that be all the buildings? Yeah.
Yeah, so as of right now, we are considering any building that has a full-time classroom with low incidence. We are looking at those buildings. That would only the elementary
3 elementaries.
that we would not use.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, it would, right now, it would be 3 elementary buildings that we would not use if we started off with our low incidence students bringing them in. Every other building would be used in some capacity. To give you a rough idea, 10 to 12 building, it's roughly identified as 43 students. Now, whether all 43 of those students choose to come into the building, that's something that's still to be determined. I can tell you, speaking with some of our special ed students, I know already of a few that will not send their students in for a variety of reasons. And at the 9th grade center, an example, I think there's 1 classroom. Same thing with 8th grade.
Yes.
I'm not sure how many in the 5 to 7 building. Go ahead.
There are 3 classes at the 5 to 7, or I'm sorry, in the 7th grade center, and 3 classes at the 5-6. I'm sorry, 3 classes at the 5-6 center. I believe it's UPE, Limerick, and Evans. Evans.
4 classes at 5-6. I'm sorry.
4 classes at 5-6. And again, we're looking at those full-time programs. So whether it's learning support, autistic support, our MDS classrooms, and our emotional support program.
You referenced the backlog. What does the backlog look like, and what's going to be the impact of that on new testing requests or what have you?
I'll use the term extensive. In communicating and discussing with our psychologist, they got a big job to do. And we have a big job in regards to making sure that we're supporting them to the best of our ability. I use the term extensive because that will vary from building to building. Not only do we have evaluations that need to be finished from March 12th to the end of the school year, but as you just mentioned, we are going to have new reevaluations with new testing. We also will have new evaluation requests that are coming in. So it will be a lot to manage. It's hard for me to sit here and really give you a time frame in regards to, I'll use the term when we feel like we're going to get caught up, but it's going to be some time.
You did great.
All right.
What can the board do to help you with this backlog?
Do you want me to answer that? You want me to answer it? I'll answer it if you want me to.
Go ahead.
You sure? Okay. All right. So right now, the biggest thing that I would say for right now is your support. Over the next couple of weeks, we'll really intensify those conversations with our psychologist and take a look at their logs. We know they already have. Could there be a possibility that we may come to you and we might need additional psychologist support? Yeah, I think that's something that, if you're asking me honestly of what potentially could be needed, yes. I know part of the staffing request was to add additional psychologists or 2. We understand the reasons of why we couldn't move forward with those additional personnel at the time. But if you're asking me honestly, at some point, that might be something that we may be coming to you that we might need additional school psychologist support.
Oh, come sooner than later.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
Fair enough.
We appreciate that, and I'm sure our psychologists do as well. The one thing that I do want to mention as far as coming to you for additional psychologist support, we're going to be in the same situation as the rest of the Commonwealth in regards to potentially looking for additional psychologist support. There are only so many psychologists out there, and through our meetings at the county level, that's something that has been discussed, and there's only so many contracted school psychologists out there to be able to help districts with their backlog of evaluations.
Sooner than later.
Yes, thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions? Linda, were you going to say something? Okay. Well, thank you very much for that presentation. Thank you all for your continued hard work. And we hope that we will see those students get back into the building and we continue to move in that direction.
Yeah, we are hoping as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.